Somewhere in the middle of the North Atlantic, a brand new ocean liner was being battered by winds of 60 miles an hour, while waves crashed again and again over her upper decks. On board, passengers stood at the windows, watching wave after wave slam into the ship. This ship had been in service for exactly 3 months. She had never faced a real Atlantic winter before. And now she was fighting for every mile toward New York, crossing the Atlantic on the same schedule as her sister ship, through one of the worst storms either ship would face in her first year at sea. What happened next would become the defining moment of her first year at sea, and it ended with 3 ocean liners side by side in front of the Statue of Liberty. This is the story of how it happened. The voyage wasn't a routine repositioning cruise. It was the opening leg of Queen Elizabeth's very first world cruise, and Cunard had built an entire event around it. 2 years earlier, in January 2009, Cunard's 3 liners, Queen Mary II, Queen Victoria, and the retired QE2, had staged what the company called a Royal Rendezvous in New York, gathering all 3 Cunard Queens in one place for the first time. It had been a publicity sensation. Now, with Queen Elizabeth newly in service, Cunard planned to repeat it on the same calendar date, January 13th, exactly 2 years later. This time, the lineup would be Queen Mary II, Queen Victoria, and the brand new Queen Elizabeth. 3 queens together in New York Harbor for a second royal rendezvous. To make that date, both Queen Victoria and Queen Elizabeth needed to cross the Atlantic on the same schedule, departing Southampton within hours of each other and arriving in New York on the same evening, where Queen Mary II, which operates transatlantic crossings year-round, would already be waiting. It was choreography on an ocean liner scale. 2 ships, thousands of miles, one shared deadline. And the departure itself was already dramatic. Passenger accounts from the voyage described Queen Victoria's departure being delayed by a medical emergency on board, so Queen Elizabeth actually left Southampton first, setting off alone into the Atlantic on her first ocean crossing, with her sister ship following soon after. The route itself followed the classic transatlantic track that liners have used since the age of steam, departing from Southampton on England's south coast, out past the western approaches of the English Channel, and then directly across the North Atlantic toward New York, roughly 3,000 nautical miles of open ocean, typically covered by a modern liner in about 6 or 7 days at cruising speed. It's a route with almost no shelter. Once a ship clears the continental shelf west of Ireland, there is no coastline, no harbor, no possibility of ducking out of bad weather until land appears again on the other side. Every winter crossing on this route is, to some degree, a gamble against the North Atlantic's weather systems. And in January 2011, that gamble did not pay off quietly. A few days into the crossing, both ships ran into a deep, low-pressure system, typical of the North Atlantic in winter, the kind of storm that forms when cold Arctic air collides with the relatively warm waters of the Gulf Stream, rapidly intensifying into a full gale. Onboard measurements and footage taken by passengers documented winds reaching force 11 on the Beaufort scale, described as a violent storm, just one step below full hurricane force. On the Beaufort scale, force 11 corresponds to sustained winds of roughly 56 to 63 knots, or about 103 to 117 kilometers per hour, with waves capable of reaching 11 to 16 meters in height and visibility reduced by driving spray torn off the wave crests. Passenger video from Queen Elizabeth's decks during the storm shows the ship pitching heavily as her bow rose and fell into oncoming swells, spray bursting over the forward decks many stories above the waterline, and the horizon disappearing behind sheets of wind-driven water. Queen Mary II, already at sea on her own scheduled crossing at the time, recorded similar conditions from her own upper decks, giving a sense of just how widespread and severe this particular system was across the shipping lanes that week. This was as serious a test as North Atlantic weather gets, and it came remarkably early for a ship that had only just entered service. Queen Elizabeth had been handed over to Cunard in October 2010, and named by Queen Elizabeth II herself at a ceremony in Southampton on the 11th of October that year, sailing on her maiden voyage to the Canary Islands the very next day. She was 294 meters long, built at a cost of around £350 million, roughly $560 million, and designed to carry just over 2,000 passengers, cared for by a crew of around 900 to 1,000. Like her sister ship Queen Victoria, she had been engineered with a reinforced bow and hull form built specifically to handle heavy Atlantic seas. That design choice mattered here. Neither ship altered course dramatically or sought shelter, and both continued making way toward New York throughout the worst of the weather. Storms of this intensity don't sink modern ocean liners. That isn't the danger. The real impact is felt inside the ship. Passengers described being confined largely to their cabins and public rooms low in the vessel, where the motion was less extreme, while stabilizers worked to reduce the rolling as much as physically possible. Loose items came off shelves, and some onboard services and outdoor deck access were suspended for safety. Seasickness became widespread among passengers unaccustomed to sustained heavy weather, a normal, if unpleasant, consequence of days spent inside a moving hull being struck by waves from multiple directions. There is no record of any life-threatening injury or major incident directly caused by the storm itself. The crossing's most serious documented complication was the medical emergency that delayed Queen Victoria's departure from Southampton before the ships even entered open water. What both crews faced instead was the grinding physical experience of sustained heavy weather. Noise, motion, disrupted routines. For the better part of several days, a routine hazard of winter transatlantic service that professional Cunard crews are trained and equipped to manage. Cunard's captains on both ships made the calculated decision to hold their course and schedule rather than deviate significantly, betting that the ships and their systems could handle Force 11 conditions safely. A bet that, in the end, was fully justified by the outcome. Despite the battering both ships took in mid-ocean, they arrived on schedule. On the evening of January 13, 2011, Queen Victoria and Queen Elizabeth completed their tandem Atlantic crossing and sailed into New York Harbor, where Queen Mary II was waiting to complete the trio. At 6:45 that evening, all three Cunard liners, Queen Mary II, Queen Victoria, and the storm-tested Queen Elizabeth, positioned themselves together in front of the Statue of Liberty for a coordinated fireworks display. The Empire State Building was lit in red for the occasion, and crowds gathered along the Manhattan waterfront to watch three of the largest ocean liners in the world assembled in one place, a scene that had only happened once before, exactly 2 years earlier to the day. For Queen Elizabeth, barely 3 months out of the shipyard, it was more than a photo opportunity. It was proof. She had crossed the North Atlantic in January, met a Force 11 gale head-on, and arrived in New York on schedule, ready to continue on into her first world cruise. The rough crossing that passes had filmed from the decks a few days earlier had become, by the time the fireworks lit up the harbor, simply the story of how the newest Cunard Queen earned her place among the fleet.